Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the second Kaufman Foundation, Charles E. Kaufman Foundation webinar hosted here by the Pittsburgh Foundation. It's really great to have you with us. I'll be introducing our team in just a second and interested in making sure that you know that this is an interactive session. We're going to start with a bit of an overview of the Kaufman Foundation program and processes. It's going to largely be a reiteration of what you see on the website, but this is also an opportunity to ask any kind of broader clarification questions. Please feel free to use the chat for that space as well. Brittany on our team will be monitoring that, Brittany Eltman. If there are any specifics, we might want to connect with you offline, but really happy to have you here and kind of part of the program and welcome your questions too. Let me move my screen. Just a little bit of housekeeping is that auto captioning is being provided for today's event. So if you'd like to enable that, you can do the closed caption button at the bottom of the desktop app or at the settings section of your mobile device. Again, we'll be using the chat for questions. And if you could please remain muted during the call. You can leave your camera off. It's lunch. Please enjoy your lunch and take your time. And if you have experiencing any technical difficulties, you can send Taryn Lumley, our colleague here at the foundation. You see her up in the corner of this Pittsburgh Foundation tag directly in the chat to kind of help you out. For those, just in terms of our commitment, diversity, and equity and inclusion, I'm a 54-year-old white male. I'm a white male. I have sort of short, dark hair. I'm in my office space with a set of headphones on that make me look like an air traffic controller, actually, because we've recently gotten rid of our phones. So this is our new process. And I'm in an office here at the Pittsburgh Foundation with a blue wall behind me and a lamp. So thanks again for joining us. Mr. Kaufman is really an incredible visionary, and our goal and mission at the foundation is to see his donor intent amplified and operationalized through this program as a team of both staff, a scientific advisory board, and an amazing board of directors. One of his quotes was he felt that he could accomplish more through others than ever through himself, and he established the Kaufman Foundation here as a supporting org of the Pittsburgh Foundation in 2010. And he was an avid outdoorsman. On the screen is a picture of him. He was an active member of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which is also another portion of funds that he left that goes to the Conservancy. And he dreamt of being able to support innovative pursuit of fundamental scientific questions in the disciplines of biology, physics, and chemistry specific to the state of Pennsylvania. And he really worked closely with our donor services team and Center for Philanthropy and was really, we feel it's an incredible honor to see his mission and guidelines forward. So the guidelines that you see within the fund are set up in communication when he's established the fund before his passing. And that's our really mission, is to kind of keep him forward. So as you think about Kaufman, think about Mr. Kaufman being with us and seeing this work through. The foundation's mission is to support fundamental research, again, in chemistry, physics, and biology in institutions of higher education here in Pennsylvania. And the grants are distributed through three specific areas or models or methods. One is the new investigator research program, then one of the others, the new initiative research program, and then a later emerged integrated research education award program, grants program that is designed to help support smaller Pennsylvania institutions that have a real strong education focus. Again, all of this information is on the website, but please, reach out with any questions too. Our team here at the Pittsburgh Foundation that helps manage the Kaufman Fund, Christian Gauthier is a PhD member at the staff at the University of Pittsburgh and the Department of Biological Sciences. He serves as our scientific consultant and works with the program. Brittany Eltman, who is on the call here with us today, if she could wave, is the program assistant here, managing largely the grant-making activities. Bree Casaus was unable to join us today. She's our assessment and learning associate at the Pittsburgh Foundation, which will be doing a lot of external project management of our Kaufman Foundation activities. And then I direct the program on behalf. And so I work for you all and work for everyone in this process to make it work well. We're really fortunate to have Graham Hatfull here. Dr. Hatfull is chair of the Scientific Advisory Board, and he was here at the founding and starting of the at the Kaufman Foundation here at the Pittsburgh Foundation. He's been both an advisor, scientific guide, and just a real thought partner to help this program evolve. The program itself, as you submit applications and LOIs, are reviewed by a phenomenal scientific advisory board, and there's a link here so you can learn more about them and their background as well. They help guide the scientific review and rigor of the process itself. The entire program and foundation is guided by a board of directors, which we report to and work with. And ultimately, it's the Pittsburgh Foundation board that is responsible for ratifying these grants. So kind of a couple layers of responsibility and accountability, and it's our job here to work and support that process to be as impactful and thoughtful and careful as possible. So talking a little bit about the two different major sort of primary focus areas that Mr. Kaufman envisioned for his fund here at the foundation under the New Investigator and New Initiative Research Funds. Before we get there, I wanted to drive your attention to the news release. Here it says for the 2023 Kaufman at pittsburghfoundation.org. This is actually last year's release. This year's release just came out about 10 days ago. Please check that out just to see what kind of things were funded, what kind of activities were supported, and for an idea of who are working in similar areas across the state, because we really want to foster, and we'll be looking to probably do some in-person engagement over the next year or two, and really want to foster collective engagement across the state as well. So please check out our website. If you have any trouble connecting to it, let us know. The new investigator grants are designed to support innovative scientists in Pennsylvania as they transition into their academic career. So these are really early startup support activities. Proposals must examine, again, fundamental science research questions focused in core principles of biology, physics, and chemistry. Important to note that when this was started in 2010, but even as the fields have evolved, scientific advisory committee, but also the board are really interested also at areas and boundaries that are interdisciplinary between these fields. And so really interested in some of, even as new investigators, but especially in the new initiative work. Applied or clinical studies themselves are not supported. So this is more applied science, and happy to talk to you more about that work as well. So this is not intervention work and science in that space. And up to 6 awards at a maximum of 150,000 are funded over, can be funded over 2 years. That's about 75,000 a year. We've had some interesting questions that came up. Could you do 51 year and 100 the next year? We're really open to those strategies, and we can talk to you specifically about those if you're invited for a full proposal around how that might meet with your institutional guidelines. And I wanted to share one more thing here, but I'll get to that next in terms of the eligibility criteria. This is I wanted to share. There have been some changes here. Primarily, these are investigators who have a primary appointment in an institution of higher education. Applicants must be United States citizens and lawful permanent residents or lawful permanents at the time of the LOI deadline. So if you have questions about timing, please let us know. We did change some of the criteria in terms of status at the university. So it should be a full-time tenure faculty member on the tenure track appointment, but we also adopted the NIH guidelines around you could be an independent research faculty appointment within your institution, but you have to show evidence in your LOI that you have an independent lab or that you're working independently and not underneath another investigator. So this is really recognizing some of the evolution in the field that we've seen as well. Applications, people who for the new investigator award, may not have completed successful PI to receive a substantial independent or NIH type of funding, or that would be the R01 or a National Science Foundation independent investigator. These are the 5-year, $200,000, $250,000 a year. If you've done that, we're super excited for you, and we hope you will look to apply to maybe one of the new initiative awards. But you've done it. You've successfully gotten there, and you've kind of made that hump to doing some initial investigative research. That does not mean there's not need at your area, and but all of us on the team, I was a faculty member in higher education in a School of Medicine for 18 years. So I've gone through this grant writing process. I supported myself through the career funding timelines and processes too. If you have questions about the eligibility criteria, we'd also love to have them. We have also changed the guideline in terms of you must have obtained a terminal research degree or clinical degree within the last 10 years. That used to be 7 years. We've extended that also to be more consistent with the field as well. The new initiative grants program, the goal is to stimulate and establish investigators to work in innovative collaborations. This has been a really exciting space where we've seen some phenomenal work come forth between a textile scientist and a physicist looking at some of the intersecting areas around the laws of dynamics and how those could be applied to other work in the field. So we're really looking in this innovative space. The Scientific Advisory Board and the Kaufman Foundation Board are here to learn from you. So if you have really out of the box ideas, please share them forward. Again, this is meant to support Pennsylvania only institution. So all the investigators have to be within the state of Pennsylvania to be involved as an investigator or co-I in this work. Proposals are required to examine, again, biology, physics, or chemistry, or the boundaries between those. These are larger awards, up to 4 awards at a maximum of $300,000 a year, generally split $150,000 per year. Also noting, though, that if the board, because it's driven so much by the rigor of the science, if there are less new investigator awards funded, that might create room for one more, new initiative or in that ward as well. So this is really a science-driven, novel science impact work driven initiative. That's really the primary focus of this program as well. It's not, do we have equitable distribution across the state or others? Those are criteria, but it's really science-based. The eligibility criteria here is that there must be 2 investigators, again, identified on the project. Faculty members must designate a principal investigator and then other co-investigators. The PI themselves is the institution where the indirects and other institutional support will go. Again, the same criteria apply here in terms of resident status, appointment, and all investigators must reflect expertise in biology, physics, or integrated subspecialties. The proposed research must be a new initiative and not a currently funded one from other sources and just an add-on. I think what the Scientific Advisory Board is really going to look for is what is the new area that's coming together. You may have published previously with this person, you may have done some work together, but if this is really just funding your established co-research areas, that really wouldn't be considered novel or innovative. It's really about trying to bring some of that work together in a new way that you just have not been able to in the past. I wanted to share with you just in terms of a little bit of benchmarking. This data is a little bit old, but it's from a recent study that we finished in 2019 that shows the trajectory. If you look at the Kaufman program, in 2013, 14, 15, and the trajectory, we see that, basically people who were, in terms of scholarly output and publications per year, people are really on the trajectory of rising in their field. We really like to think that those, we're able to help through the Kaufman Foundation provide some spark early novel findings with this work that allow others to then get other scientific funding, which is part of this scholarly output, to help sustain and perpetuate their careers, and then also help develop opportunities for other institutional support and collaboration that they may not have had otherwise. And we learned from our surveys of other scientific members of this community that the Kaufman Foundation has been able to really help them as well. A little bit of overview in terms of who generally gets the majority of the funding. These numbers, we're going to be working to updating these over the next year, but you see the large portion in physics and astronomy, biochemistry and genetics, and molecular biology, chemistry, and material science with a mix in between. And, these are self-identified areas as we did the survey work and reached out. And so really interested in sort of seeing how that grows more broadly. You'll see that there are some disciplines here represented at medicine, neuroscience, very applied fields. We welcome those applications. We've really encouraged this year, and Brittany's done a ton of work to make sure that we could share the Kaufman opportunity across many different disciplines. But the same principles around fundamental science are really what drives the focus and priority for Kaufman. It is not that work is not awesome and fantastic, but for the Kaufman guidelines, we try to stay really true, and we have to stay true to Mr. Kaufman's priorities. But we know that the disciplines have grown in different areas, and we really encourage a lot of interdisciplinary input. Survey findings, I'm just going to quickly move through because I want to save a lot of room for some of the chat and questions that are coming up. But wanted to share that many of those all those who had responded to our surveys and work feel that Kaufman has helped advance their career since receiving their foundation funding. The majority have been able to raise additional funds using the findings from the Kaufman Foundation. 67% have published their findings within 2 to 3 years of completing the research, and all would recommend the foundation to other colleagues. Since receiving their first for the new initiative awards, similar kind of guidelines and outputs. We don't want to offer too much to sell, but just to say that we think that this could be really a helpful part of advancing your career in practice. And so we encourage you to submit an LOI as long as it's really aligned with the guidelines and focus of the fund as well. We added this frequently asked questions. If anyone's participating in this webinar that participated in last month's, wanted to let you know that we're interested in, helping to unpack any eligibility questions you might have. The new timing and deadline areas around 10 years or others. We do want to note that, some people have been we recently gave some feedback to an investigator who was 11 years out, actually, but they were able to share some information around some professional changes and impact of COVID. And so we've made an exception to some of those guidelines. We're really interested in bringing forward and supporting the best science here in the state. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to us with some of those areas. In terms of allowable budget expenses, I don't have my field went away here too, but it's pretty clear in the application eligibility criteria of what is allowable per budget. There's a 10% indirect support cost that is completely static at this time, that cannot be changed. And for example, for the new IREG program, you can use those indirects to support student and stipends and summer housing, but you cannot use those to support investigator salaries, kind of in that case too. Publications, wanted to make sure you add publications to your LOI and make sure to include that in your application. The letter of inquiry is your first opportunity to make sure to talk to the board and to the scientific advisory committee in their review process. And so be as clear and concise. We've had questions of whether or not you can put a picture in there. Pictures are great as long as they don't confuse the process. You want to make sure that that picture, so we always joke that you want to share this with someone from a different discipline or one of your colleagues and say, don't be afraid to ask a colleague to read your LOI. Does it make sense? And have other people critique it, and just to be transparent in that process as well. Less information is more in this case. Filling it up with an LOI with lots of acronyms that require the scientific advisory board or us as reviewers to go to Google and try to figure out what all the acronyms mean is not meant by making it this accessible to the scientific mind, but may not be disciplinary specific. But we want to also make sure that you understand that the people who are reviewing these are the top scientists in the field as well too. So finding that balance of how to communicate your work, application, and importance of it is really important. Not a good idea to recycle maybe an application to NIH and put it in here. You want to take a step in the middle and help translate it to us for the Kaufman Foundation guidelines. Graham, did you want to jump in on that one before we move on?
No, I think that's generally clear. I would just add that a grant that's written to be funded by NIH or NSF, for example, they're often the kind of proposals that are very detailed, very specific, and are often somewhat risk averse, right? Because you want to be proposing work for which the reviewers feel there's a very good chance that they'll be productive and be successful. Whereas for Kaufman, it's much more risk tolerant and a greater focus on suggestions, proposals, and topics that are sort of new, interesting, innovative, maybe somewhat risky, but have a relatively large payoff. And so that's what we're really looking for. And then I just want to emphasize in terms of the disciplinary aspects that it's important to understand that all the proposals are reviewed and discussed by the entire SAB, and that includes SAB members who have expertise their own professional academic expertise in areas of either life sciences or chemistry, materials, physics, etc. And so your acronym laden proposal on some potentially very interesting work in cancer biology needs to be read and understood by an astrophysicist who works in black hole questions. And so that's just a way of thinking about who the audience are and how you would try to target your proposal so that it's understandable by that broad audience, as Michael suggested.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the review process, Graham, because I was going to ask you to highlight that as well. And the collective nature of the work, what's really exciting about the process as well. You have generally your LOI and or your full proposal are assigned to someone who has a disciplinary specific understanding of that area, and then multiple others. Everyone reads them, but there's a secondary reviewer and a third tertiary reviewer assigned as well. So someone much like our federal review process, someone's primarily responsible for reviewing, critiquing, but then there's a large group discussion of every single proposal and throughout the process. So it really is a 6 or 7 hour process that really lends itself to being exceptionally aware of and concerned about any issues of conflict of interest, but also interdisciplinary referrals, but then a lot of collective discussion around the rigor of the science. It's an iterative process as well that goes forth, which if many of you may have participated in the scientific review process, that's a really important element as well. We do collect comments at the full proposal review and provide those back to the investigators. A little less on because of the numbers of the LOIs, but happy to work with you on that process as best we can to let you know as well. We've also had some questions recently about, if I have an R01, established investigator award in a different area, am I still eligible? This should say R35. Sorry, that was a typo of mine. But so if you have had like an established career award like an R01, then you will be considered kind of probably ineligible given the level of competitiveness for a new investigator award. Others have asked about career development awards like R00, the Kangaroo Awards, or those are really considered similar startup awards. You're still in a new investigator establishing status, so really interested in your application in the new investigator space. R35 as well, which could be a much larger award. It really depends somehow on the science that's happening because those are our new investigator based. I'd say that what we encourage people to do are to, if you're not sure, to submit the LOI, right? And see if it's hopefully not too much more work, but it also allows us as a scientific advisory process to learn from you, see what's happening in the field. Dr. Hatfill and I have spoken a number of times, and we've also shared with the board. We recognize that since the program was started in 2010, that the cost of doing business is more. We understand that there are some areas that we'll be looking over the next year or two on ways that we might modify the program to be realistic where the field is, to make sure that this is continually competitive. But we found from some of our outreach that still the current costs and support are also valuable in terms of supporting your research costs, but also can be used as institutional leverage and highly competitive, and hopefully open up a broader array of partners in the state as well, which we hope to cultivate. So you're welcome to reach out to me and Brittany directly if you have any questions about the grants process specifically, or application, or if you're having any trouble technically with the LOI or process, please let us know. Don't hesitate to reach out with curiosity. We've actually gotten a lot of communication in the last couple of weeks, which has been great, and we really want to be here to help serve and support you too. As we're at the half-hour mark, I see that we have a lot of chat questions sort of have come in, and Brittany, thank you for monitoring that. We'd like to move to those questions now. If you feel that you have a question that you haven't put in and it really requires that you'd like to raise your hand, please let us know as well. But Brittany, you want to get us started?
There we go. I've been answering questions as they have been coming in.
Great.
I will now bring some of the unanswered questions to you both to kind of talk through. Michael, you touched on this before about mentioning the project that oh, the pun is unravels the connections between textile work and uh, particle physics. But I wanted to bring up Joe Bragg's question, which is, can you give some specific insights into what types of projects are more likely to be funded? Fundamental or basic research is quite broad.
I have a thought, Graham. Do you want to start with this?
Well, I'm happy to add a couple of comments. So let me say the first thing is that rather than have a very strict and narrow set of prescripted sort of decision points, we try to follow the principles that were set out by Charles Kaufman. And so sometimes in thinking some of these questions, it's really a range of preferences. You can think about it like that. In terms of the fundamental science, I think one way to think about this is if you look and see where Nobel Prizes are awarded, they're usually not awarded for something like a new drug specifically, even though that may have had a substantial impact. They're more likely to be awarded for example, the discovery and potential for CRISPR engineering, for example. So really fundamental ideas that are likely to have a broad impact rather than a large but local impact. Now, of course, that spans many topics. It explicitly excludes things like sort of clinical trials, right? But nonetheless, we recognize that there is a range of topics, and just because the work is sort of basic and fundamental doesn't mean that it doesn't have evident applicability at some point. But when the SAB review these, they recognize that there's a range of these, and those projects which look like they have, are very close to being sort of applicable, applied kinds of approaches, are probably going to get not scored as high as those that are somewhat shifted towards the basic science end. And so that's just, I think, some guidelines as to thinking about how to do that. Michael.
Yeah, we really hesitate to be, as Graham said, prescriptive about this because this is really the learning edge and cutting edge of the field. So we want to be thinking about that. It would be really great for if you could in your LOI, be sure if you think you are somewhere near that edge, really help us understand why you think and your team thinks that this is fundamental basic science research. That could be a learning space for us to be thinking about in new ways. If you're doing community-based surveys, again, or clinical trials, does not mean that that is not phenomenal work. It's just not the home for that is not the Kaufman Foundation, per the guidelines of the fund and per our legal requirement, kind of to support that too. So thank you, Graham, for that too. That's really helpful. Brittany, next one.
Sure. This is an eligibility question. Can one faculty member apply as a co-PI for 2 separate new initiative proposals?
Can one co-PI? My answer would be sure. If they are, if it's explicit and clear. I don't think that the committee has ever said, oh, this person, it would make the team ineligible from one or the other. I think it shows that there's disciplinary expertise in that work. And so I think that I can't think of an example where that has been an ineligibility criteria. You can't be a PI on 2. You can't, double dip your application or do different studies. It is possible to be a PI on a new investigator award and a co-investigator on a new initiative as well. That's something that's come up a few times also. Graham, am I wrong?
No, I think that's correct. I think in general, again, to be a co-PI on 2 different new initiative proposals is not prohibited, and I think we've seen it. Is that likely to translate into a possibility that funding of both of those proposals would be disfavored because of that? Well, you could imagine the SAB looking at that and saying, if you have other equally strong proposals, then that might become a factor. But again, not a, you know, if those were the two very top proposals, then they might very well both get approved for funding.
I
And
think
so
that's
it's
exactly right. The science is what would push it over. I'm going to try to give you all a visual of how the scientific advisory board review process works. As you can imagine, a spreadsheet that's based on the science and review, and there's initial scores that are put into a spreadsheet, and then the team and the board talks about those back and forth. There's a line of sort of what's above the line and below the line that's iterative and always focused at. So every new proposal that gets focused in, is this stronger, scientifically innovative in a way that's really unique, and does it move it up or down? And that line continues to move through the process. At the end, if there were, as Graham mentioned, 4 or 5 that were really on the line and really close, that might be a distinguishing factor, but it would be something far peripheral to the rigor of the science that's being proposed.
Yep.
Thank you, Brittany. Next one, please.
Getting there. We in general, we have a lot of questions about is X award disqualifying for a new investigator application. And to those, I've routinely said, I mean, if it's an obvious, you know, like an NSF, you know, career launching grant, then yes, that would be essentially disqualifying. However, if there are grants that we have not mentioned, or awards that you are not sure of, please email kaufmanapps@pghfdn.org so that we can discuss your eligibility as a team. The priority is giving you a correct answer, not necessarily the fastest
quick answer. Yeah.
So if you are unsure and if we are unsure, let's take that time to dig into the meat of the question rather than giving a cursory response. So again, with any of the questions that you have, that would be an appropriate place to direct them.
Yep. And what we'll do is we'll communicate out broadly, because we have all of your emails because you registered for the webinar. We may just send, if, you know, we actually got more questions this year than in the past. So maybe there's a little table that we set up that says yes, eligible, not eligible. And we just want to make sure to do our due diligence and research before we throw that out there as well. Because some of those new investigator type launch awards can be very large. And, you know, that's something that is certainly not going to be a core element of initial criteria. But if we have similar rigor of science and initiative work, but one has already, you know, received an award or a really fundable score or something like that too, you will be asked, if you're invited for a full proposal, to share any funding updates in between the LOI phase and the full proposal application time, because some of those transitions you noted in your LOI might have come into. So it's a little art and science here. We want to be fair, equitable, and we really feel that clear is kind. So we want to make sure to communicate with you effectively. So do send, as Brittany said, those questions to Kaufman Apps.
A couple of other questions. Success rates, can you speak to kind of translating from LOI to full proposal, then to funding?
Oh yeah, I meant to have that data, and Christian has been great to run that in the past.
That data is in the Q&A sheet.
Yep, can't find it. That's what I was trying to look for. So we'll look that up and get that to you in just a second. I wasn't looking at it during the presentation. Someone did ask a question about having could it be a co-I on a new investigator award? Generally, those are an independent investigator that are applying as a new investigator in those. I don't think we've had co-Is commonly as a new investigator to support that, only because the funds are smaller. But I would want to check on that to confirm.
I can just comment, Michael, if you want a little bit on some of the questions about funding rates. At least I can give a perspective that I think might help, as opposed to hard and fast numbers.
Okay.
The number of awards that the total amount of funds that are available is what it is, right? And then that funds a certain number of awards between 4 and 6 new investigator and new initiative awards each year. The goal is to have a number of full proposals submitted that are going to fund those at a rate, I'm going to pull out a number, something like 30%, or was it between 25 and 35%? In other words, if you write
That's
a full
right.
proposal, you've got a pretty good chance of it getting funded. I mean, better than most federal funding agencies. And so it's intended to be that way in order to make it worthwhile for putting in the extra work to submit the full proposal. The rates from going from LOI to full proposal is only determined by how many LOIs come in, right? Because the more LOIs that you get, the lower that percentage is going to be to get a particular number of full proposals from that. I think probably at one extreme, at one point it was about 11% or something, because we had a very large number of LOIs that particular year. But other years it may be 20% or something, because there's a different number of total LOIs that come in. And so it is deliberately, the programs are deliberately structured so that you can do a relatively simple one-page LOI without a huge amount of work, with clearly articulated, novel and interesting and engaging ideas in a one-page submission. And even though the chances of getting from there to an award are relatively low, then once you if you're invited to a full proposal and you put in the extra work to put in the 5 pages, the yield becomes much higher. And the last thing I just want to say is that it's important to be cognizant of the fact that we're funding in fairly broadly in the basic sciences and physics and chemistry and life sciences and all the things at the margins of those. And we try to maintain, not per year, but by program and over a period of time, some balance. But you're competing against all of those other disciplines when a particular topic is being considered for suitability and for recommended for the next stage.
Thank you, Graham. I do have some specific data to share with you in terms of the new initiative awards. Last year, 22% of the LOIs that were invited, 22% of those LOIs submitted were invited for a full proposal, and 28 of those full proposals were funded. I do definitely want to let you know we have done everything we can in the last year or two, and really exhaustive, right, Brittany, to get as many people aware of Kaufman. We expect the LOI numbers to go up by about 20% this year, so that number may be a little slower, but then lower, but then we expect the same sort of full proposal amount to funding to be about the same. Next question, Brittany. Oh, and I want to make sure to let you all know, if you came to this webinar looking for an answer that we haven't covered in the presentation, please use this time to ask or reach out to us. We want to be as helpful and as accessible as possible, so don't hesitate to reach out. Brittany, any others?
I am in the process of answering some. Here, 1 second.
We have had some questions. I'll just, while you're stalling, say, like, can you ask for an expanded amount to the grant award? No, like new initiative or 300,000. Generally, we can work for some flexibility per year if you'd like. Again, new initiative or 150,000 total. We do often have people asking for, you can get a no cost extension at the end if, COVID is a perfect example of where many of these awards were stretched out. We really, Mr. Kaufman would want to support great science and research. We're willing to work with you along those guidelines. Repurposing your grant somewhere in the middle to attend a conference in Thailand is really not going to work. So it's got to really stick to the scientific focus and same kind of categories. If you do during the grant program have questions, then you can always reach out to us too. Thanks, Brittany. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes. Important question. I think that we've gotten this via email before. What is the procedure for requesting an extension of new investigator status? So beyond that 10-year.
Yep.
range?
So you can send us an email directly to Kaufman Apps at pittsburghfoundation.org that Brittany mentioned, and we're happy to reach out and engage you. What we're looking for is to be as clear and supportive, and we know that life happens in others while also keeping parity for others in the same category. So I would say, just rather than that's the procedure. Please reach out to us and we'll definitely be in touch. We generally try to respond to you with your queries within 48 hours. If you don't hear, something happened, but one of us will be in touch for sure.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And I've just put the email address in the chat. And then the other new question that I see and just popped up is, what is the expectation of providing preliminary data for the new investigator award?
For the new investigator award, Graham.
Yeah, I'll be happy to chime in.
Yep.
The expectation of preliminary data is, the expectation is essentially none, right? Now, it's like any proposal. When you see a full proposal where there's the opportunity to include preliminary data, for example, then often it's helpful to have some supporting data that that shows that the investigator can take on and do this kind of work, or if there's a particularly wild idea, which is probably wrong, then it helps to add some preliminary data that supports the idea that there's some rational basis for thinking of that, right? But the emphasis for new investigators is as it is for new initiative grants as well, is for good, new, interesting ideas. And if you've got a really good, new, interesting, and sort of sensible, gripping idea, but you don't have preliminary data for it, then that will be seen by the SAB as exactly that, as a potential award of some interest. And some new investigators applying for those positions will be in a circumstance where they may not have a lot of preliminary data, and that's understood. And that's all going to be balanced out with all of the other aspects and facets of the proposal.
Yeah. We got the same question, I believe, Brittany, for new initiative awards. What kind of preliminary data? It's a really good question. I'd say that there's a sweet spot between showing that you got enough information that this is really worth funding and pursuing, without saying that you've already done it, but you'd like some more money to do it more and bigger. I think in that way too. So I think that can often be addressed and help us think through those questions exactly as we just described. Just even if it's to answer your question around is this new and growing, you want to help us understand why this new collaboration and a new initiative is novel, impactful, and is really needing the Kaufman funds to take it to a place it couldn't get to otherwise. So just talk to us through your process.
Yeah. And then two related new initiative questions about the nature of the collaboration. So we have a question that asks, what if you make a connection after you've been invited, after your LOI has been received, with a new collaborator who could really add a lot to your proposed study? Would you include that new person then in a full proposal write-up? Or is that not permitted because that person's work was not described in the LOI?
So my inclination is, for parity purposes, what you submitted as an LOI and was reviewed by the committee is important, what you were invited to submit a full proposal for. If there were remarkable extenuating circumstances, but otherwise you're potentially submitting for a different project in different ways, and that wouldn't really be fair, I think, to the spectrum of other people who applied. And I see Graham nodding, which is good.
Yeah, I think that if you imagine a proposal that started out with investigator A, at an LOI, investigator A and investigator B, and then on the full proposal, you had a full proposal where they dropped investigator B and added investigator C, right? Then that's feels like a bait and switch, right? Because now it's been approved from LOI to full proposal, but it's a different LOI with different investigators. Now, in a different scenario, if you have investigator A and investigator B, and then for the full proposal, there's a suggestion to add and then to include investigator C, then that's not really a bait and switch. It's more of an elaboration, and that's probably going to be seen, depending on the overall part, as a benefit. The question would arise: why wasn't investigator C added at the LOI stage? And so you would need to articulate that in a compelling way, right?
Yeah. Again, the benefit of the Kaufman Foundation is being clear and accessible, but we also pride ourselves on being nimble and responsive while also being fair in the process too. So we want to be clear. Graham, there's something about your response just now that flashed me back to the SATs. So that was an SAT question response almost. So thank you. Brittany, others?
Yeah, and then similar question on the collaboration piece. So you have two PIs who've worked together for quite a long time, but they're moving toward a new kind of sub-discipline, or they're moving toward a new effort, but together. How is that perceived by the SAB? So it's a long-established collaboration, but it's a new realm.
Right. So the new initiative idea is in order to foster new initiatives. Most of those are going to be new collaborations, but they don't necessarily have to be. If you have two investigators proposing an idea to do something, and there's a paper in the publication list that says, here's our previous efforts to do this on this question, then that's not a new initiative, right? If two investigators have investigated on a topic and now propose to open up a clearly distinguishable different direction, but it's working together on that, then that may very well be considered a competitive proposal, provided that in writing the proposal that you clearly articulate those issues so that the SAB can understand and see if they find that a compelling argument. And so that's I think the answer.
Perfectly clear. And I'd say the onus is really, this is a good example of, you want to give your LOI to your colleague next door and say, read it with this frame in mind. Does it make, these are the questions that the committee is going to be asking. And so you want to draw a really thick Sharpie line to that answer versus kind of thinking, can we sort of decipher it through new things that might be coming up? You want to make it really clear with us, because there's going to be a pile of really competitive grants, and we want to make sure that the awards this year land on the right ones. So please be as transparent and clear about that notion as well. I think there was a letter I want to also, before, because I forgot to mention it in the FAQ, is your letters of support are really important in this process as well. You really don't want, I mean, your chair is going to write a great letter of support no matter what. So you really want people in the field to be talking about your work, people who have investigated, similar areas and can talk about the novel nature of what you're doing, beyond just your chair alone. So that's why we have 3 letters of support in a process to make sure that those are really meaningful. The SAB reads those very carefully and is really interested in that kind of feedback from other disciplinary experts in your field. And they don't have to be from Pennsylvania. They can be from anywhere, the letters of support. Brittany?
A couple of budget questions. So confirming that the limit of indirects is 10%.
Yes.
Okay. And a couple of questions about.
Oh, can I answer just something? Question to that? It's just from working with many universities. That information is published on our website. It is really clear in every spaces. So that should be enough. If you need to speak to a department chair or someone in your institution, that's often a criteria. It is published and pre-published, so that shouldn't make you ineligible. Though if you're in the space of going to NIH and that's a 50% indirect at your institution or not, you have to, we just want to be as clear about that as possible. Sorry, Brittany, thank you.
And then the other budget question is, so capital equipment improvements are not permitted with Kaufman funds. Can you provide examples of what those types of purchases might look like as to avoid them?
Yeah, so if you're going to buy a Sub-Zero freezer that is a big part of your work and you can use it for lots of other projects versus your Kaufman research, there have been some, random exceptions based, during the program where something had failed. But in general, there are institutional costs that, to set up your lab and others. There might be, something related to reagents and others that are scientifically spaced, or maybe a new piece of equipment that relates specifically to this research. But if that's, I'd say that that's a good area that if you have questions of what's capital or not, please reach out to us before if you're requesting a full proposal. But we had a request for, basically a, $20,000 freezer, and that wasn't eligible because we would consider that institutional. Graham, any other insights?
So we recognize when we review proposals that sometimes a project requires a particular specialized piece of equipment. And so these questions do arise. I think that, if the SAB reads a proposal and it appears as though the investigator has written this really as an equipment grant, essentially, they're really just asking for the money to buy the equipment because they don't have any other means of buying the equipment, then that doesn't look very good, right? And because we want the work to be done to advance a new initiative or a new investigator program, and so the bigger and the more expensive the equipment is, the less that overall program is going to be attractive. And on the other hand, it's understood that sometimes investigators are in a bind if they need a particular piece of equipment to do a particular kind of work, and so that's a matter of how it's justified and articulated and presented.
Yep. So please be explicit in your LOI and the materials that come in. I'd say the one exception here is for the IREG awards, even though those are smaller awards. These are institutions that have less infrastructure in some ways. And given the very student-focused area, if there are ways that make that a science that you're proposing more collectively engaged with your students in that process, then I would say that could be, addressed and entertained by the committee as well, while it can't be, like Graham said, is an equipment request.
Yeah, and then this will have to be the last question, I believe, because of timing, the meeting will time out at 1. And again, just to clarify, this is being recorded and this will be sent out or made public. Please, we will try to publish it to the website, and if you have a separate request for it to be sent to you, please let us know at Kaufman Apps. The final question that I see is, are research assistantships for students permissible or allowable budget items?
So that has come up, especially during IREG for like summer tuition and others, and not tuition, sorry, summer stipend support, even in some housing cases. And definitely look at the guidelines. They're really clear on what is an admissible cost and what is not. If you have questions as you're working on it, please let us know. The IREG guidelines are a little less specific, which we're going to be updating for next year, so we can let you know. But if you have questions in your budgeting proposal, if you're invited for a full proposal, let us know as well. I was just looking at my phone. I see a lot of you have put in questions to Kaufman Apps, which is great. And we'll work through that queue and make sure to respond quickly. There are one question I do want to bring up is that many universities have unionized their research support staff and some of the postdocs and others in their programs, which has then required the university to cover much higher rates than are previously covered. I would just say, just be thoughtful of what you're asking for and how we can't up an award during the program or provide supplemental funding other than what's been awarded as part of the original grant. So that's somewhere that, we'd want to make sure to see if there are ways to leverage institutional support to offset that. That would be important because we just don't want that to be the primary source of support, though we totally support the fair wages and support of students and trainees. I do want to, with the time that we have, thank you for the space and time and the questions that you provided. We want this to be as helpful as possible. If we didn't get to your question or you have others, I'm a bit of a slow marinator, so I often think of questions after the call. Just please reach out to us. As always, want to thank Graham for your leadership and guidance in this process as the SAB chair. And we're always here to learn with you. So please feel free to reach out to us. Everyone have a safe and warm day, hopefully wherever you are.